What's up, YouTube, and welcome to Codename Scream. I am that horror guy, and if you haven't done so already, please make sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications for all things horror. As you can see, I had to recommandeer Studio A once again. No, I do not have a guest this week. There's some renovations going on over at Studio B where I normally shoot, so we had to change things up a little bit. So next week we'll be on home turf. We're in unfamiliar but familiar territory here. But welcome to SLASHETHON. Things are going to be a little different, as I promised last week, bringing in the final girls' final first round. Did not actually tell you guys who won intentionally because of how this episode was going to end up working out. By a landslide victory, Laurie Strode took the win against Sydney Prescott. The Team Laurie fans came through. I'm also with you guys. Thank you so much for all of the votes that came in for both sides. This brings Laurie Strode up against Michael Myers for our round two, which is the final round two, which we will explain here a little bit more toward the end. But because of the fact that we have Michael versus Laurie, this kind of throws the whole Slashathon thing up on its head a little bit. Not that we didn't expect this, we kind of saw this coming, right? I know I kind of did. But we're not going to have necessarily our points going on this week. We're going to change things up a little bit. And mainly because going into this, there are 5 films with Michael versus Laurie to some degree. And you guys have seen them, you may not have. So for those that may not have, we're just going to do a brief synopsis. This is going to be almost like an extended With That Being Said, if you would. You're going to get 2. It's like With That Slashathon Said. I don't think that's going to stick. But, so, we're going to just discuss the 5 films briefly that they both have faced off in. And then at the end, where we would normally do a points breakdown, I'm just going to kind of go for it and just who I feel should move forward. And then we're going to have the big reveal for round 3, which will be for next week for this one. So we'll get into that. But, so, as I mentioned, we have 5 films with Michael versus Laurie, starting in 1978 with the original Halloween, 1981 with Halloween 2, then we jump the 20-year gap going into Halloween H2O in 1998, then followed by Halloween Resurrection in 2002. We don't see another face-off between the two of them until 2018's Halloween. With these series, Halloween was 1, 2, H2O and Resurrection all are one canon together. They, with the release of H2O, had completely retconned anything that happened after the events of Halloween 2. And then Resurrection was going to continue and be the films as we knew them. Then we got the zombie remakes, and then we got thrown the curveball of 2018, which then decides to retcon everything but the original. So, fun little thing of how that worked out in the end. With H2O specifically, it was meant to be, at the time, the last Halloween film, where Laurie actually ends up decapitating Michael at the very end of the film. 2002, we end up getting Resurrection, where Laurie is institutionalized in an asylum, because it turns out it's not actually Michael that she had decapitated. It was actually one of the paramedics that were on site from the events of H2O. Michael had broken his larynx so he couldn't speak and choked him out right then and there, switched out the clothing, and ends up being in the paramedic's clothing, gets away from the scene. The paramedic is in his clothing, obviously can't speak because his larynx has been crushed. And when he was reaching out for her and everything, it added kind of like a kind of a sad twist, if you would, to some degree. So she's institutionalized for this, and then Michael finds her in the beginning of the film and subsequently kills her. And then Resurrection was going to become its own thing. It never took off. That actually did not fare well with both critics and horror fans to a degree. Starting with H2O as well, with just the choicing and mask that they picked for Michael. And then you had Resurrection, which just completely threw that whole mask thing. Like, we were going back to Halloween 4 and 5 quality in masks, in my opinion, which, yeah, those 4 and 5 masks are pretty cringy. So, but the thing I appreciate about these films was the evolution of Laurie in both sets of canons. You know, you got 1 and 2, which are directly back-to-back from each other, following the events of both films. And the 20 years later in H2O, the thing I appreciate about it was it's Laurie suffering from PTSD from the events of 1978 and 81, but it's supposed to be 78. But she's dealing with that, and so she has an off-screen death to try and convince Michael that she's no longer alive, and she's almost like a witness protection program, if you would. And she ends up becoming the headmistress at a private school, private boarding school, and has a son, and how that's affecting her son. She's trying to move on with her boyfriend, and then Michael comes and finds her because he always knows. He knows the whole witness protection thing didn't work. He knows, and he ends up coming to the school, doing his thing. And then I just discussed Resurrection a moment ago, so we know how that went. But the cool thing that I noticed between that and the 2018 was there were characters that, so Laurie, for instance, both films were surrounding the PTSD from the events of the first film and how she's trying to go on with life. I liked the 40 years difference aspect with the 2018 film because she's literally spent the majority of her life over this one incident and doesn't know how to move on from it, but she's preparing for if she would ever face him again. So she's very hardened, wants to seek revenge to some degree. And that was the cool spin there, where both versions of Laurie were suffering, but both had to then face the monster and face their fear up front. Another thing that I liked about the two different films with H2O and 2018 was the effects of the first film, not only how they affected Laurie, but also how they affected her children in both films. She has John in H2O, her son, who's grown up with it his entire life, as well as you have Karen, her daughter, in the 2018 film, and Karen has a daughter, Allison. So we're getting two people that were affected greatly by the events of the first film and how it affected Laurie's psyche and how it bestowed upon the kids. So it was two really things that I didn't notice before until I went back and rewatched these recently, and I was like, that was a really neat concept and something I really appreciated about that nonetheless. So that's more or less a brief synopsis of the 5 films that they've come across each other in. And if you haven't watched any of these movies by this point, I highly recommend go out and just watch the Halloween series as a whole, but not even just that. Take a look at these films in particular, as they, to some degree, have a continuity of their own within each other's canons. But, so that's what made coming up with a point system for this one kind of irrelevant. We've seen this now 5 different times. We've seen it through a couple of different story arcs. And we know how this ends at the end to some degree. Michael always ends up coming back. Laurie does die in one canon, but she's currently alive in the one that we're currently witnessing and have a sequel around the corner for. So not necessarily a way to have the upper hand here. So this is where the voting is going to get fun for you guys this week. This is where, are you Team Laurie all the way and you want to see Laurie go into the 3rd round against somebody? Or do you want to see Michael being Michael and doing his thing going into round 3? Personally, I would go with Michael. I absolutely love Michael. He's my favorite of all the slashers, hands down. And I would really like to see Michael move his way into the final 4. Obviously, that's not up to me. That is up to you guys. So what we're going to need to do here is, the rule book's been thrown out. I want to just have you guys cast your vote. Who do you think should move forward from here? You can sound off in the comments below. You can send me a message on Instagram. You can send me a message on Twitter. You can email me. Again, multiple avenues, and we can discuss even further in any of those avenues if you'd like about how we felt about those films. What was your favorite film where those two have faced off against each other to some degree? Now, this is where things are going to get a little more interesting for you guys. Not only do you have to vote on this episode to advance Michael or Laurie to round 3, we have a little bit of a turn of events on how round 3 is going to work as a whole. So as it stands, round 3 matchup 1 will be Leatherface against Ghostface, the true face-off, if you would. Moving into this, it's going to be either Michael or Laurie, based off of your guys' votes. Not only are you going to be voting who moves on from there, you have to vote their contender. Who are they going to take on? And if you noticed, I did not have another final first round. I ended it last week with the girls. Did that intentionally. I'm throwing things on its head one more time on you guys. For round 3, you guys are going to advance either Michael or Laurie. I need you guys to also vote who you'd like to see moving from past eliminations of Slashathon to this point. So, make sure when you vote for either Michael or Laurie, you're also voting for any of the past eliminations. This is Ed Gein, Freddy Krueger, Edmund Kemper, Richard Ramirez, the Gainesville Ripper Danny Rolling. All of them, they have the ability to come back and have a second chance at bringing it through. Also, Jason Voorhees, did not want to forget him as well. But you have all of them has a chance. One of them has to come back. That is up to you guys. So when you vote this week, you're voting twice. I want to see who you want for this episode, and I want to see who you want to bring back for one second chance. When that is decided upon, that is your horror final 4. Slashathon will go into round 3 as one whole thing. And as I actually announced last week, March 26th, we are going to do our live finale for Slashathon. So now you're seeing how things are coming together. Hopefully this helped explain things a little bit more. There was some confusion even after last week. So I do apologize. Things have been a little bit more confusing, but it's all coming together, right? This is going to be awesome. So with that being said, scare you later, YouTube.